I think a lot of people believe that if they try something and it doesn't work, that's it. How many people do we all know that have some sort of hobby? Some of them are working these jobs they really, really hate, and then they're coming home and they're going to their workshop or their garage or their kitchen and they're tinkering and they're building and they're making stuff. And how many of those people, if they had the audacity or had a little nudge or a little push, would actually say, you know what, that's my life's work. That's what I want to do. I want to spend my time doing that stuff and sharing my gift with the world. I think what's holding back an explosion of entrepreneurship is we as a society generally don't embrace failure the way we probably should. And that, I think, is how you build really large, impactful companies.
Believe Nation, welcome back. I have a very special guest with me today, Harley, who is the president of Shopify, also has a new company called Firebelly Tea. Welcome aboard, man.
Thanks for having me. This is very exciting. I love your hoodie, by the way. Very cool.
Branded. We got the airplane. This for me, this is actually related. So like entrepreneurship to me is where we're the paper airplane kind of taking off into the wind. We're not the jet plane with all the resources, and we kind of hit the wind and the turbulence, but we still are trying to get to a different place.
It also is just to sort of beat up the metaphor a little bit more. It also, what's interesting about that particular metaphor, I think, is that the paper airplane, the cost of failure is not that big. And then as you get larger and larger, the cost of failure sort of goes up, but it sort of insinuates that in the early days of building a business, that's the time for you to take chances, to pivot, to try new things. Because again, if you lose one paper airplane, you just grab another piece of paper. Whereas when you get into sort of the jet territory, that becomes a lot more challenging.
There you go. I like that, man. I might borrow that.
Take it, steal it. It's all yours.
To expand the analogy. I love that. Entrepreneurs, man, why do you care so much?
Oh, I mean, where do I start? I'll start on the personal side. I mean, entrepreneurship is sort of just baked into my DNA, the DNA of my family. We are a family of immigrants. We came to Canada in 56 from Hungary, post, Holocaust survivors, made their way to Hungary. Hungarian Revolution happens. Not a very good time to be in Hungary. Canada, fortunately, let in 40,000 Hungarian immigrants at the time. My family moves here. And they don't know the language. They don't speak the language. They don't have any money. They have no real transferable skills, but they were able to start selling, in my family's case, eggs. And they set up a little stall at a farmer's market in Montreal and started selling eggs. So in many ways, I mean, my grandfather who sold those eggs didn't call himself an entrepreneur. But entrepreneurship was the tool that he used to provide for the family, to put food on the table and put a roof over their head. And then fast forward, 50 or 60 years later, in the early 90s, I'm 13 years old. I want to be a DJ. No one would hire me because I didn't know how to DJ. Why would they hire me? I started a little DJ company and hired myself and was able to DJ like 500 parties. When I'm 17, I was living in South Florida with my family, moved back to Montreal to go to McGill. Family loses all our money. Once again, pull out that tool called entrepreneurship and start selling t-shirts. And lo and behold, was able to pay for tuition, help my mom and sisters. My dad wasn't around at that point. So entrepreneurship on a very personal level has always been, I believe, the greatest tool in my life, my family's life to solve problems. And then when you sort of expand it beyond just me on a personal level, but looking more sort of, on a global level, entrepreneurship has been this incredible thing that we as humans have used to create value, to solve problems, to find our life's work, to create our own versions of success, whether that's, sending our daughter to ballet lessons, or it's, building a $40 or $50 billion company. So in many ways, the Venn diagram of my personal interest and my professional interests, I'm really fortunate because they very much overlap, and that overlap is entrepreneurship. And today, as we sit here and talk, Evan, every 30 or so seconds, a brand new entrepreneur gets their very first sale on Shopify. And I've devoted my entire life, and will devote my life, to helping create more of those first sales.
I love it, man. And I'm based in Toronto, Canada, so you've been such a huge success story for us,
Thank you.
But also just the entire entrepreneur community. Talk about the decision to now share a message, right? So you're not just the kind of president, CEO behind the scenes making things happen, but you're making content, you're posting on Instagram, you're coming on shows. What's the goal with all of that?
in my world, and I think your world, and I think a lot of your listeners and the people that watch your incredible show, Evan, I think most of us are sort of steeped in this idea that entrepreneurship is something we can do. If you go to, meetups or startup events or tech conferences, or, you're on Reddit or Twitter or Instagram, there's a lot out there that is that is sort of entrepreneurship related. But I think sometimes we forget that the vast majority of the world, entrepreneurship is not perceived as something that is accessible. Most people perceive it as either too expensive or too complicated or too difficult. It is not something that is as prominent or features as prominently in most places like it does in the case of you and I, like the Canadian technology or the Canadian startup world. I don't know how many friends you have that are entrepreneurs. I have tons. My dad's an entrepreneur. My grandfather's an entrepreneur. My best friends are entrepreneurs. My wife's an entrepreneur. My kids are setting up little lemonade stands inside our house, yeah. Right? Yeah, it's in Ottawa here, and selling lemonade and trying to figure out and trying to teach them about, cost of goods sold and how they think about profitability and how they think about marketing and sales and all that. But that is not the case in most places. And you see this simply by the amount of people that, that go to university, not because they want an education, but because they want that piece of paper to then go and get a job with it. And so part of what I think my life's work is, beyond just, helping to build this wonderful, I think the greatest engine for entrepreneurship is Shopify, unequivocally. I don't say that because of the president of Shopify. I say that because before I worked at Shopify, 15 years ago, I was a merchant on Shopify. I sold t-shirts on Shopify as one of the first merchants when I was in law school. But the vast majority of people do not believe it's accessible. So I think that I'm uniquely positioned and have a unique responsibility to share those stories, those anecdotes, and try to get more people to think about entrepreneurship. Think about this just as a mental model, just for a second. How many people do we all know that have some sort of hobby? They make, beautiful ceramics, or they, build beautiful figurines like I have back here, or they make incredible, chicken soup, like my mom does, matzo ball soup. And not all those people should commercialize those hobbies to become entrepreneurs. But some of them should. Some of them are working these jobs they really, really hate. And then they're coming home at 5:00 or whenever they come home. And they're going to their workshop or their garage or their kitchen, and they're tinkering and they're building and they're making stuff. And how many of those people, if they had the audacity or had a little nudge or a little push, would actually say, you know what? That's my life's work. That's what I want to do. I want to spend my time doing that stuff and sharing my gift with the world. That nudge, that push, I take that very seriously. And I believe that I might be able to encourage more people to try their hand at it. And therefore they may find their own unique versions of success, and they may find their life's work. And if I can be valuable in that way, and I can share some of that with the world, that's what I should be doing. I
love that. You're getting your kids starting lemonade stands is how I started. Think how a lot of us started, but you're teaching your daughter about cost of goods sold, just making her.
Well, I mean, we're, at this point, we're living in an inflationary environment right now, and lemons are getting more expensive. So she needs to know we have to charge more money for lemonade, and she should understand why we should charge more people for lemonade.
I love it. No, it's great. You've kind of eliminated the barriers to get started in selling products, right? A lot of entrepreneurs, technology is not their main thing. And so cool. You don't have to be the expert. Just open up a Shopify account and you're up and running. How important is community to it? Because you mentioned you've got all your friends and family and your wife, are entrepreneurs. What is Shopify doing around the community side of things? And maybe where are you going with community so that entrepreneurs can be connected together?
Yeah. I think about community in two sort of buckets. The first bucket is just the economy of scale. So we don't really talk about this very often, but if you were to pretend that Shopify was a single retailer just for a second, if you combine every one of our stores, we have millions of stores, but pretend they were one store. That one store would be the second largest online store in America.
That's crazy.
After Amazon, and well above, Target or Best Buy or Walmart.com or any of those others. So that means that you, as a Shopify merchant today, you are able to build a unique independent business that is yours, your brand, your business, you own it. But at the same time, you can leverage these economies of scale on things like payments or shipping or capital or technology or infrastructure for that matter, anything for that matter. So that's part of the, like by being part of the Shopify ecosystem or community, you immediately, even though you yourself may be a small business, you are now able to leverage the much larger benefits of being part of this community. And that allows you to compete better. That allows you, entrepreneurship is still difficult. Most small businesses fail. But what we're trying to do is simply try to change that direction just as much as we can, which is still, not that much, because again, it's entrepreneurship is hard, but we think we can make your likelihood of success a little bit easier. And again, if you're reselling someone else's products, or you're a drop shipper, or you're a creator, and you're not making very many things, that additional 20 basis points or 10 basis points or 40 basis points on credit card processing rates, that makes a big difference. Yeah. Or your ability to get shipping labels from, any of the big shipping companies at the same rate, at the same price that 10 years ago, the biggest companies on the planet were getting, that makes a difference too. So that's part of the sort of community side. The other part of the community side is just entrepreneurship can be a lonely endeavor. It's not, you tend to do it by yourself. And so one of the things we try to foster through things like, for example, Shopify Spaces, which we have one in New York, we have one in Los Angeles, where any entrepreneur can just drop in, or the Shopify forums, or any of the Shopify, online communities, whether it's on Facebook or it's on Twitter, Instagram. We try to facilitate more of that community feel, even though everyone's running their own independent business. And I think the cool part about running a business in 2022 relative to, 1922 or 1822 for that matter, is there was a sense in previous generations of entrepreneurs that things were zero sum, meaning if you made more, someone made less. And that often was because if you were in a physical, let's say you were in a town square 100 years ago, and there was a baker there, and you open up a bakery, there's the total addressable market of that for that bakery is pretty clear. It's the people that live there that want to buy bread, who can afford bread. So if you open a bakery and there's another bakery down the street, you may make more money and that other baker makes less money. But that's not the way modern business works. Modern business is fundamentally positive sum, meaning you may find a niche or a geography or a demographic or a community that other baker never even encountered because it wasn't obvious. So maybe your bakery on the internet, which has, effectively a total addressable market of anyone with an internet connection and a credit card. Maybe the other bakery does well, but you make, your bakery is, you have cookies in the shapes of dinosaurs, which some of my kids are really into right now for some reason. So that baker's making cookies, but you're making like dinosaur cookies, and like people that want dinosaur cookies on the internet, if you combine everyone that wants it, that's actually that's a real audience. So we try to facilitate community, not just because we think it's important from a competitive advantage for these entrepreneurs. You combine a bunch of tiny little lights, you get the sun. That's important from an economies of scale perspective, but also because entrepreneurship is difficult and lonely. And if we want to be the entrepreneurship company, we very much do. I think we have the best shot at being that globally. We also have to facilitate those types of connections and relationships.
What I love is if somebody is, watching this and they're the only entrepreneur in their family and they've got this crazy idea to start a business and nobody else believes in them, and they set up on Shopify and they see somebody else who made their first 10K on Shopify or 100K or $1 million on Shopify. It's like, they made $1 million selling dinosaur cookies. Like maybe
it changes everything. I mean, a lot of what I talk about, whether it's on social media or it's on earnings calls, is I talk about Shopify, of course, but I really try to focus on the Ben Francis Gymshark story, or the Richard Fashion Nova story, or the Tim and Joey Albert story, or the Trina and Heather Fig story. I try to focus on these stories or David Bombas, of these stories of people that started at their mom's kitchen table with an idea and a concept and a product. And in many cases are now, publicly traded multi-billion-dollar companies, and they are owning their industry. I mean, they're like, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect they're at some board meeting inside of Nike, someone brought up the challenger and the risk of Gymshark. That's an unbelievable thing that, a college dropout from London who was selling pizza or delivering pizza, I should say, is now being considered to be a real insurgent relative to the incumbent of Nike. That's That's an amazing thing. And so those are stories I want to tell more of, because again, I'm not saying everyone's going to build their own Gymshark, but not everyone has to. Ben Francis really wanted to build a very large scale apparel company. He wanted to change an industry. He felt that there was no great clothing for that particular niche. So not people that necessarily go to the gym that are bodybuilders, and not people doing yoga. There's something in the middle, and he felt that market was underserved. And so he wanted to solve that underserved problem. But, Mike D from Durham, North Carolina, who's a friend of mine, who makes Mike D's barbecue sauce, he doesn't necessarily want to build a $1 billion brand. He loves making barbecue sauce and sharing barbecue sauce with his community and the people that he loves. And he wants it to, allow him and his wife and his 2 daughters to have a great life. And by the way, Mike D's barbecue sauce is fantastic. It's just shout out to that brand. But his definition of success is fundamentally different than Ben Francis' Gymshark is. And that's okay.
How do you calibrate the impact? This is something I struggle with personally, right? We've had almost 500 million people watch the videos. I don't know what that number means. It feels hard to connect to. All of your stores combined, it's the second largest retailer. It's just, how do you calibrate the impact that you're actually having on the world?
The second largest retailer in aggregate is a cool one. The other one that I love is, that every 30 seconds or so, a new entrepreneur gets their first sale. That's a big one too. But one way to do it is, I think the best companies create opportunities for others instead of just conquering them. And so for Shopify, that means for every dollar, this is a real stat, for every dollar in revenue that Shopify made last year in 2021, our merchants made $38. So what we're trying to do is, we've been lowering the barriers to entry into entrepreneurship for, I think actually today is our 16th birthday, Shopify's 16th birthday, which is kind of cool. So we've been lowering these barriers for 16 years. And then if you even go beyond just our merchants, you look at our partner ecosystem. Our partner ecosystem supported something like 650,000 jobs and generated $32 billion in revenue in 2021. That's up like 45% since the prior year. So, I think there's that term, the Bill Gates line, in terms of, you have an ecosystem, a real ecosystem, when you create more value for others and you capture for ourselves, or when you capture for yourself. Shopify has that. We have that in spades. And we look at that from a partner perspective, but also from a merchant perspective. And then you also kind of think about, from an impact, can we try to not just grow our piece of the pie? So if the pie is the amount of entrepreneurs in the world, we can grow our piece of the pie by ensuring more entrepreneurs use Shopify. We should do that. We've been doing that. But what if we actually grow the pie itself? What if we convince more people to try their hand in entrepreneurship that wouldn't otherwise do so? And that, I think, is how you build really large, impactful companies and real businesses, not necessarily just by taking a bigger piece of the pie, but by growing the pie itself.
How do you bring that momentum or sense of urgency or sense of impact that you're having to then the people on the team? Like if somebody's just working kind of back end engineering, working on the next feature, is like layers removed from the customers and the stories. How do you as a leader ensure everybody feels like what they're doing every day actually matters? You
don't remove them. You make sure that every single person at Shopify spends time talking to merchants, which they do. You make sure that as part of the onboarding of joining Shopify, you build a store, you use the product, you ensure that as part of onboarding and as part of, your tenure at Shopify, you jump on the phones and take support calls. You ensure that people at Shopify, speak to entrepreneurs in their community. When COVID hit, we encouraged everyone at the company, I think at the time we were, close to 10,000 people, to go out to their communities and figure out how we can help. And so, I think like a week or two post COVID hitting, like May 2020, we had a hack days and you saw people creating, gift card product so that, their service-based business in their community can start selling on Shopify and make some money. You saw people creating, grocery functionality. So if you couldn't go to the grocery store, consumers can, or a small grocer can start selling to any consumer. You don't create this separation between frontline and back office. Rather, you make everyone deeply aware of the mission. The second thing you do is, and this is not, I don't think anything that's going to be, overly provocative or interesting, but it's the truth. The vast majority of people at Shopify self-identify as entrepreneurs. You mentioned, Firebelly. The reason I started Firebelly, I love tea. I love starting new things. I don't have exactly all the time in the world to do these things, but it felt to me that the last online business that I started was in 2006. And I felt that I wanted to really understand in a very deep and with real empathy, not like, I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur, like understand what it's like right now to be an entrepreneur. And the best way I could have done that, which makes me think better at my role as the president of Shopify, is to start a brand new business. And so that's why we launched Firebelly Tea in November. And that's not that interesting, or that's not that unique. It's not like, it wasn't a big deal that I launched Firebelly because so many people at Shopify have their own online stores as well. Bush Pump's a really good example of that. David Gaylord built that. He was on the support team at Shopify, and it's a real big business now. Bathorium. There's so many of these Tease Tea by Sheena Brady. There's all these incredible entrepreneurs at Shopify who work at Shopify who also have great businesses. That's how you ensure that you don't just talk about mission, but the mission is actually embedded into the culture of the company and the people that work there.
Yeah, I'm finding I'm struggling to do it effectively with my team, and we have 40 people. So, right. It's inspiring to see you doing it at a much, much larger scale than me.
It's not easy, right? I mean, most people, I think, misunderstand culture as being, the hoodies or the logos or the signs you put up on the wall. It's not what culture is. Culture is what people do when no one is watching. When no one is looking and you're free to do whatever you want, what do you do? How do you act? How do you do your work? And I think, there's a lot of great companies to work at. I think if you come to work at Shopify, you're coming because you truly believe in this mission that a world with more entrepreneurs is better, because you deeply believe that more small businesses should have access to the tools that mostly the big companies have had access to historically. And if you believe that, it's easy to live that mission. It's not like, it's not difficult. We're not selling sugar water. We're not selling advertising. We are selling, for most people, their ability to find their own versions of success and to find their life's work. That matters.
I love the Steve Jobs cut out there. I talked to a lot of presidents, and what I love about you is you're not just talking about like the macroeconomic trends and talking to the media of, perfect president, but like you actually deeply care about the thing that you're making and still deeply rooted in helping your customers, which is refreshing and awesome. And I want more. When's the Harley podcast coming out and like book tour? And I don't expect that anytime soon. It is difficult to run a very large publicly traded, multinational company. It takes up a lot of time, and you have to build real scaffolding and have a really strong team around you. If I felt that I could create more value for Shopify and create more value for entrepreneurs, I would probably do one of those things. But I think the best thing that I can do for entrepreneurs and for small businesses around the world is to continue to, do my best work at Shopify. What do you think is missing for entrepreneurs? And you've solved a lot of the technical problems of people getting up and being able to sell so they can focus on what they love. What else is missing to help an entrepreneur launch their business and be successful?
I think a lot of people believe that if they try something and it doesn't work, that's it. It just didn't work. This is our fault. This is my fault. And also, Evan, your fault, because you and I are entrepreneur storytellers. We believe that we are, we basically, that's what we do. We are storytellers, and we tell the stories of great businesses and great entrepreneurs and great, founders and innovators. But we often forget to talk about the failures. And I think the reason that's dangerous and you and I should be hyper aware of this is that by neglecting telling the full story, some great entrepreneur comes on your show and talks about their big success, and by not telling all the failed attempts, we make it seem as if you try something and it doesn't work, that's the end of it, which is not the case. I think that talking about resiliency or perseverance is not anything new in a conversation like this. But what I think most people miss about entrepreneurship is that it's usually the second or third business that really hits a home run, or the second or third attempt before you actually hit the home run. That for many of us and many people right now that are starting, it will not be the thing they're working on right now. If you look at our most successful stores on Shopify and you look at their admin, you look at their account history, you will see that many of them have started like 2 or 3 stores before settling on that final store that actually worked. That is not well articulated in our industry, and I think we should do a better job of that. And I should do a better job of that.
That would be a pretty cool stat, if you had it, for anybody who's now crossed over 7 figures. in their store? How many other stores did they have before they hit seven figures?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that stat, but that would be interesting. I think also where you're going with your questions, what else is missing? Manufacturing is difficult. We don't help with manufacturing really. I mean, it's just not part of the Shopify product offering. And I don't think it will be, but that's difficult, right? That is difficult. It was difficult before, it's difficult now. But there are other things that were difficult that got much easier. For example, finding your first customer, finding an audience. When I was selling t-shirts back in 2006 on Shopify, the only way for me to get an audience to come to my online store, it was called Smoofer. The only way for me to get an audience was to spend money on AdWords. Facebook ads didn't exist then. Facebook didn't really exist that much. I think they were just sort of, it was sort of the first iteration of Facebook. So it was Google ads. Therefore, the person that had the most amount of money, the most amount of capital ended up winning. It's very simple equation. Put $1 in here, get $1.10 out the other side. I didn't have a lot of dollars, therefore I didn't have a lot of $10s on the other side. So there was inherently this bias towards those with capital made more money. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think in 2022, resourcefulness is more important than resources. And, capital's, creativity is more important than capital. Some of the best businesses on Shopify that are doing tens of millions or 100 millions or $1 billion a year on or more on the platform, they started simply by, a Reddit forum or a Facebook group or, engaging on a particular hashtag on Instagram or Twitter. And they're like, hey, I guess you're my community now. By the way, let me add somebody to the community. And then eventually I'm going to also have a product. Would you like to see it? That doesn't take a lot of money. That does take patience and creativity and hustle and character and all that stuff. That is really, really important. But that to me is why I think now more than ever before, the leveling of the playing field around entrepreneurship, it's not level. It's definitely not level, but it's more level now than it has been previously.
You were talking about, the belief that it's possible and sharing the examples of when we look at other people and see they've had success. Hey, maybe we can too. How do we solve belief? So many people with great ideas, you help them every day. And there's, 10 times that number or more, just kind of sitting on their idea and never getting started and never open up a Shopify, still convincing themselves that it's too hard and someone like them can't do it. How do we shake the limiting belief that we can't do it?
Well, we all have different levers. I mean, my lever, and I think your lever is quite similar, which is that we can tell their stories. We can tell the stories of entrepreneurs that are unlikely to have succeeded, but have. Despite that, we can tell stories of our favorite brands, where they come from. I wear a black hoodie most days. I talk a lot about Blue Salt because I think Lindy and what Lindy did with Blue Salt is incredible. Soul Angeles, I think what Eli did and the whole Soul Angeles story is amazing. I'm wearing Bombas socks. I think what Dave did with Bomb is amazing. So the way that I think I can do that is through storytelling and making sure the world knows about these great stories. But I think the other thing is also we should, I never took an entrepreneurship class in college. I did a economics degree in undergrad and then law school and business school, but there was no entrepreneurship class per se. However, I was an entrepreneur throughout all of those years from 17 till, I graduated business school at 24, 23. I was an entrepreneur. And I was an outlier. I've now recently met up with, classmates of mine that I went to law school with. And I've, now that we're all kind of, we're more grown up now than before, they'll sort of admit to me that they thought in law school I was completely distracted. They didn't think I was taking law school seriously. And I explained to them, I was like, no, I was, but I wanted something different out of law school than you did. You wanted to get a job out of law school. I was greedy about acquisition of information, knowledge, and resources and skills in law school. I felt that law school, I was paying law school $15,000 a year to get my degree. I thought in return for that, I was greedy in terms of, okay, I need $15,000 of value, and the degree that you promised me is not worth anything to me. So therefore, I need to get value through the skills I acquire in this program. And then between classes, I was sending emails and taking phone calls and running my t-shirt business. So I don't know how we change that culture, but it still feels like today, I'm sure someone listening to this is probably an undergrad or in graduate school somewhere in high school, and they're an entrepreneur and their friends think they're silly and they think they're distracted like they did with me. I think we need to change that a little bit. I think that entrepreneurship is not necessarily something that, even the term entrepreneurship is probably not overly helpful. My wife is an amazing entrepreneur. She's a psychotherapist. She also had an ice cream business, but like she's an entrepreneur. She would never call herself an entrepreneur. She would call herself a small business owner. There are things that we can do that we sort of are doing inadvertently that I think makes entrepreneurship less accessible. We need to just make it more like, if you have, Nike did this amazing thing. Nike convinced the whole world that if you have a body, you're an athlete. We need to do the similar thing, which is like we as a community of entrepreneurs, where if you have ambition and you have someone to share with the world, you very much might be an entrepreneur. And I think if we do that, you will see more people try their hand at it. Then that will be a flywheel. That will, like, after that happens, you will simply have the flywheel will just be spinning, and you'll see so many more interesting things. And by the way, as like consumers of these products, everything's going to get better. You're going to have more choice, more interesting products to purchase. You're going to have, so much, like, you're just going to have more interesting things in your life relative to if there's no entrepreneurs and we're all just wearing Amazon basics.
What I love is, as you go off and add more value than you're taking, and you create success stories in different communities, people can learn from someone like you and an interview like this and get inspired. But you're creating little mini ambassadors all around the world, not just for Shopify, but for entrepreneurship, that maybe they can't connect to me, they can't connect to you, but they can connect to their friend who started a Shopify store and now they quit their job and doing it full time. It's like, maybe I can do it too. Like, you're creating this little system of ambassadors out there in the world encouraging entrepreneurship, which I love. The whole small business versus entrepreneur. Do you think small business as a term is contributes to limited internal thinking?
I don't have a better version of that. I'll just use my own personal situation with my wife. Lindsay just doesn't like the term entrepreneur because it's the term that I used ad nauseum. I'm always talking about entrepreneurship. And she's like, no, that's you. I'm like small business ice cream person. And I think nomenclature, I think naming things really, really matter. And so I think, Shopify started as a small business, and it is now, I think, the second or something like that, one of the largest companies in the country. At some point, I think we were the largest company in the country last year by market cap, ahead of the Royal Bank.
Does that sound crazy?
I never, but that sounds totally crazy.
You're bigger than
Royal Bank. It's an amazing thing. I think now we're still the second or third largest, company in all of Canada, which is an amazing thing from an entrepreneur perspective. But I never felt limited by the fact that Shopify was a small business, or we never referred to Shopify as a small business. It was just Shopify was a vehicle to achieve a goal, achieve a mission. I think that's a much better way to think about it. So if I had to roll back, not that I need to give Lindsay any advice, nor would she take the advice from me, but Lindsay and I were walking when we first had our first child, Bailey, around our community here in Ottawa, and we wanted to go for an ice cream. There wasn't an ice cream. And Lindsay started to take some notes and tested ice cream and learn about ice cream and learn about like the air content in ice cream. Basically, ice cream quality is effectively a derivative of how much air is in the ice cream. So like a lot of air is like Baskin Robbins, and a little bit of air is like Haagen-Dazs. It's just the quality of the ice cream changes based on how much air. So she went like deep into it. And then she set up Sunday school and started selling ice cream to the community. You could articulate as a small business or an entrepreneurial venture, but ultimately all she was trying to do is solve a problem. The problem was, our community here of Beechwood, which is where we live in Ottawa, Beechwood did not have an ice cream shop. She wanted Beechwood to have an ice cream shop because people she thought would like ice cream. She solved the problem. I think we should go in, if we sort of, think about this is like solving problems as opposed to putting monikers or titles or any type of branding on it. I think it's a better thing to do it. But honestly, I don't know if that's necessarily what's holding back an explosion of entrepreneurship. I think what's holding back an explosion of entrepreneurship is we, as a society, generally don't embrace failure the way we probably should. And I think it's even more prevalent here in Canada. I was born in Montreal. I live in Canada. I'll probably live in Canada the rest of my life. But I grew up, I went to high school in South Florida. And I think I think Canada actually tends to be even more risk adverse than most countries, at least relative to the US, in terms of failure. We tend to, there's that tall poppy syndrome complex that gets brought up fairly often. I think you can get around that, but I think it's certainly present, which is also why I like doing great shows like yours here, where I can talk more about Shopify. I can talk more about, my life and my ambitions and where I think Shopify can go and why I think everyone in the world should be an entrepreneur at some point, or at least a lot more people should be entrepreneurs. Because I think that those of us that have had any type of success, those of us that have any platform whatsoever, we have to use that platform to change something. And, I've years ago, I used to go to Startup Fest or any of the big Canadian tech conferences. And I get asked, what would I do to fix about the Canadian tech world? And I would often talk about the fact that, I want to see less acquirees, more acquirers. And what I meant by that was not necessarily that I want to see an increase in M&A activity. That's fine. What I meant though, is that I often would get asked about a company in Canada, hey, what should we do if we want to get acquired by Google? And I always sort of thought it'd be a fun thought experiment to say back to them, well, have you thought about acquiring Google yourself? Like you acquiring Google as opposed to Google acquiring you. And of course that would it would break their brains about what are you talking about? I was like, well, you should think that way. There is a chance and a way for you to be as big as that. And Shopify our ambitions were always really big. The reason we went public in 2015 was we wanted to be a 100-year independent, very large scale company. We thought that was the best way for our achieve our mission. And to do that, the IPO was a part of that journey. And so not only did we go public, but we were very vocal about our IPO process, why we were going public, why we thought it was a good idea to go public, so on and so forth. I think that stuff matters.
I love it, man. I'm curious, how to do it. I remember somebody asked me, if I had an unlimited budget to get my YouTube channel set up, what should I do? It's like, okay, you got an unlimited budget. You should hire these 5 people and start your channel and start to grow. And then I sat back later that night and said, wait, he said unlimited budget. He should buy YouTube, not just hire 5 people and start his channel. Right.
Exactly.
Right. It's but we just don't live there. We don't live in that, I'm going to buy YouTube kind of mindset. Is there how do you keep that big thinking front of mind, as especially the leader of this company, that we're going to go and change the world? How do you not just fall back to the norm and what everybody else is doing?
Yeah. There's a couple hacks to it, but I think they're all sort of, they're all based on your own personality and what works for you. I have been really lucky and fortunate to surround myself with a group of people, friends, mentors, advisors, coaches, psychologists, people in my life, my wife, my kids, who inspire me to think bigger about things. And I think that is really important. It's cliche, of course, but that the whole, you become the 5 people you spend most of your time with. That's a real thing. And the flip side of that is energy vampires are also a real thing. There are people that give you energy and there are people that take away energy. And so I've tried to be meticulous about where I'm spending my time, with whom I'm spending my time with. And do I leave those opportunities, those engagements, those dinners, those drinks, coffees, whatever meetings, feeling more energized and thinking bigger, or less energized and thinking smaller? And it's gotten easier. I'm incredibly fortunate, and I know how lucky I am that I get to have people in my life like Seth Godin, who I can call at any time and say, hey, here's how I'm feeling about this. Am I looking at this right? And he's like, well, Seth's brain is the biggest brain ever. He's like, no, I think bigger. Or I can call Toby, or I can call, any of the people I work with at Shopify. I can be like, hey, here's what I'm, and they're like, nope, think bigger. But it's also required that I cull and remove certain people from my life who make me feel smaller and think smaller. And that's a tough thing. I mean, there are people that were in my life for a long time who it couldn't be in my life anymore. And it's not because I outgrew them. It's just their version of their vision for their life and the way they look at the world is different than mine. And it is on me because I let them affect me, but they did affect me. And so I was honest with myself and said, you're living your life, I'm living mine. But every time I spend time with you, my life gets adjusted just a little bit, but it gets adjusted a little bit in the wrong direction. So therefore, every time we meet, the volume gets turned down. I want to be, I want to be fully present. I want to be ambitious. I want to live this life that I envision. I've tried to envision for myself for a long time. Therefore, I need people that turn up the volume for me. And that matters, I think, more than almost anything else. I mean, you can read great books and you can go to great conferences and listen to great podcasts. But for me, the way that I am able to continue to think really big about the things is to be incredibly deliberate and disciplined about who I'm spending my time with.
Love it. Well, final question. I'm curious who your entrepreneur heroes are. Is it your grandfather who sold eggs? Is it Steve Jobs selling sugar water? Like who do you look to as your heroes of all time?
I mean, my grandparents and my parents, have played a huge role in my life in very different ways. The person actually that I'm the person right now that I'm really impressed with, and I'm really quite inspired by, is a guy named John Hope Bryan. I actually recently joined his board from Operation Hope. John is an African-American businessman, business person from the US. He lives in Atlanta. I think a couple of years ago, he was like awarded like banker of the year, like just super, high performing, huge, big brain, very ambitious, very successful. But a couple of years ago, he said, I don't want to be a banker anymore. I actually want to go and I want to help more. I want to create more Black-owned businesses. And so he just said, like, I'm going to take everything I learned as a banker with all this great experience, all this great success, and I'm just going to shift it over to something else. And I'm going to take that learning and be focused on creating, in the case of a collaboration I'm working on with him, Shopify, and I was working on with him, we want to create 1 million Black-owned businesses in the next, I think, 8 years. Through this program. He wants to create financial literacy and then not only create a curriculum around financial literacy, but then embed it into the school system. But I think what he's doing, and he doesn't get enough credit for it, is nothing short of mind-blowingly ambitious and inspiring. And every time I meet with John, I think bigger about the whole world.
I love that. We'll get some info on John, and we'll link that up in the description below as well. Harley, man, thank you for the time, the energy, the love. You left me with a whole bunch of aha moments and breakthroughs, and everything you're doing to support the entrepreneur community is amazing, but your heart and your care in when you're ready to get your YouTube channel started or get that podcast going.
I'll just come on your show. You're kicking ass on the YouTube thing. It's I watch your videos. I think you're doing an amazing job, and thank you for telling the stories of so many entrepreneurs. That really matters.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on.
See ya. All right, thanks.
To see my recent one-on-one interview with Gary Vaynerchuk, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I'm talking about something that the world thinks is a contradiction. I don't understand why anybody should ever verbally dress down an employee in a meeting, ever.